Welcome to the Neural Implant Podcast, where we talk with the people behind the current events and breakthroughs in brain implants in an understandable way, helping bring together various fields involved in neuroprosthetics. Here is your host, Laden Yurachek.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Neural Implant Podcast. Today's guest is Dr. Sam Browd, and he is a pediatric neurosurgeon, UW professor, NeuFluent, and CMO, which is a venture studio for neurological technologies, and has done a lot of work in the BCI space and hydrocephalus, concussions, tone management, everything like this. So lots of different, very interesting things. I'm really excited that you and your crew reached out. I think this is going to be a great conversation. Do you want to introduce yourself better than I just did?
I appreciate you having me. Super excited for the conversation today. Yeah, I'm Sam Browd. I'm a pediatric neurosurgeon. I made an interesting journey. We were talking about before we just got on, from school in Gainesville through Salt Lake City for neurosurgery residency, and then out in Seattle. Been here 20 years. Been very lucky to find my way to doing device development. It's been an amazing part of my career, thinking about ideas and spaces that I thought needed some attention in neurosurgery and sort of adjacent areas, and have spun a bunch of companies out of the university, more recently as co-CEO of a venture studio that you mentioned, NeuFluent. We've been working there with partners in industry, a variety of different university partners, thinking through really the neurosciences, and it's such an amazing moment in time to think about what we can do for neurologic disease. So I've been really spending a ton of my energy on that over the last number of years. So yeah, excited to chat today. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, we're geographically linked. I think we're opposites, right? I was born in the Seattle area, moved to Salt Lake City, now ended up in Gainesville, and you did the exact opposite. Funny how that works.
Yeah, it's a small world.
Yeah. So tell me about, I guess, your background, pediatric neurosurgeon. How does this inform everything? And I guess, how do you get into that? What are you doing there? All this.
Yeah, my path started actually in high school of all places. My grandmother had Alzheimer's disease. I grew up in Miami, and during high school, I was so frustrated at just the path that she took. There didn't seem to be any answers, and so I found my way over to the University of Miami to work in a lab during high school. I really had no experience with that, loved it, I had a great mentor there. When I got to University of Florida, even my freshman year, I went into a lab that was doing brain science and got intersected through that into the neurosurgery department. So I was actually measuring MRIs, looking at the size of the hippocampus, because that would tell us what side the seizures originated on. So I got to go to epilepsy conference and saw that crazy world of neurosurgery, which was really appealing early on. And I was very fortunate to be in Gainesville, which had one of the best neurosurgery programs in the world. And so I've just been very lucky along the journey there. So I was in Gainesville for 10 years, undergrad, MD, PhD. PhD was in neuroscience, doing functional MR imaging for motor imagery and learning. So how does the brain react and have neuroplasticity to learning events was what I did. And then journey through the rest of training was Salt Lake City for neurosurgery, and then out to Seattle. Peds became an interest. Again, you find mentors along your journey, and there were some amazing pediatric neurosurgeons in Salt Lake City, and it just felt super impactful to take care of a kid, because something you're going to do and help them with really is going to be something that stays with them their entire life, which could be 60, 70, 80 years. And so and the diseases that we treat in peds are just so compelling. So it's been a great place to have my career develop, and we've been fortunate to be able to think through different devices and other things that impact that patient population specifically.
Wow. Yeah, interesting. And then just the neurosurgery thing that got you interested in brain computer interfaces, BCIs, or what what was the pathway for that?
As in Salt Lake City with BlackRock and some of the Utah Ray, as everybody listens to your podcast would know, I had a crazy experience as, I think, an R3 third-year resident, to put one of those in a case. And I was like, this is insane, right? We're taking this chip with these little sharp little stickies on them and impacting it into the brain. And I was like, this is crazy. This is the future that we're looking at here. And it was really early days. This is now, I'm dating myself, but like 25 years ago. And now you look at where the field has gone and what's happened, and the intersection of all the things that I think we're seeing with AI and the ability to implant devices for a variety of different purposes. It's always been an interest of mine, and now all of the pieces of my world are like intersecting back toward that moment.
Yeah, I did a internship at BlackRock as well. And yeah, that was a little bit after you. Yeah, 2009 or something, 2010, so 15 years ago. And I thought on one hand, it's like, wow, this is so futuristic and this is so awesome, but also it's so primitive. It's like a bed of nails. And so it's like this duality of future and past somehow. No offense to any BlackRock people who might be listening, but it is kind of this, what is it, Iron Maiden torture device style looking thing.
Yeah, I had the same thought too. I was like, on one level, I was like, this is amazing. And then the other part, I was looking at this beautiful brain sitting there, and then we're taking a little hammer and smashing it with this thing laden with 100 nails in it. And so it was an interesting juxtaposition of those things for sure.
Yeah. Great. And so now one of your projects is NeuFluent, and this is a venture studio for neuroscience, especially neural engineering. Do you want to describe this? What's a venture studio?
Yeah, so this came out of a lot of the work that myself and one of my partners, Ryan Douglas, had done. I've had the great experience out here at UW of being able to come up with an idea, run it through tech transfer, spin that out, start a company, hire into that, and scale it. It's a very arduous process and it's very expensive, very time consuming. And so Ryan and I got together to start to rethink, how do you do this faster? How do you find partners? How do you know it's the right thing to actually make relative to what the market wants? And so we really reformulated sort of the thought process of how to do device innovation. Part of that was, again, how do you work with universities and bring these amazing technologies and concepts and intellectual capital that's in there and bring that forward and make it happen on a timeline that makes more sense and be very capital efficient too, right? In terms of how you're raising money. So we ultimately took those lessons and decided that we would build NeuFluent. So the idea of a venture studio is we aggregated together all the component pieces and the luminary best of the best guys that we've worked with in different domains. So that would be everything from engineering to EE to regulatory to legal to marketing branding. How do you put everybody into the middle and then basically bring in technology or invent technology that you can use that same system over and over again to get it to a particular inflection point? And we've made a significant emphasis on finding strategic partners like big strategics. For example, like Medtronic, they know what they need in the market and those gaps that might be missing. And then the idea is that we can either develop those things or work with university partners to find technologies that may be nascent or may not even be recognized by the university as of a commercial value, and then work with them to be able to bring those out. So it's a complicated world out there of technology, innovation and development. And so the thought was, can we bring our knowledge of it and the challenges that we had faced and try and rethink that process a bit. So that's been the work that's ongoing for the last number of years. And as I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit, just thinking through what does the BCI space look like now and what are the opportunities to maybe think a little bit differently about that.
Okay, so it sounds less like an accelerator incubator where people come to you and then you help with the regulatory and all these different engineering things that you mentioned, but it's more like an internal team, and then you guys are out and then spinning off these technologies, working with a strategic, something like this.
It's a bit of both, right? So I'll have colleagues from around the country come to me and say, I've got an idea or I want to work on this thing. Like, how does this happen, right? So sometimes they'll go out on their own. Sometimes they'll come in house with us, and then we'll work together with them to bring that forward. And that may be with that individual investigator, if you will, but in partnership with their university to accelerate the development and exit of those technologies out of the university. And again, the path to market, we try to upfront figure out what is, if you will, like the exit strategy. Is there a market for this thing? We want to understand that. We want to understand what is the commercial path upfront before we go spend a lot of money to go build a thing. You want to know it has a home, it has an endpoint that makes sense. And so putting that discipline around decision making and what technologies should move forward and how do they move forward either individually or aggregated with some other technology has been a big focus of what we've done, and have really brought those lessons to a number of universities and technology transfer groups around the country.
Yeah, that's exciting. And I think absolutely needed. There's that valley of death. And a lot of times PhD students graduate and they make a potentially really good discovery, but then they're done eating rice and beans. They want to go eat meat and make some real money. So they don't want to spend another decade spinning out a company. They're done with that. But yeah, you could potentially pick that up. And especially if you have the skills and knowledge, you're able to turn that hopefully into something that's actually useful for people.
A big thesis of mine over the years is historically in academia, it was really frowned on, right? You were the evil one if you want to go out and make money and sell your idea and all this stuff. And I think that is changing a lot. And we're actually seeing this happening a lot in the institutions themselves for very clear reasons, right? NIH funding is contracting a ton. It's never going to come back to the same level. Places that have large clinical enterprises are seeing decreasing clinical revenue. So they're all starting to look for ways to monetize either data or intellectual capital. And for that graduate student who had a brilliant idea, we'd love to see them benefit from that, right? The organization where that work was done, they need to benefit from it. And more importantly, as humans, as ultimately potentially patients of in need of these technologies, we want to see these things get out into the world more rapidly and be able to help people. And that's been really my focus. It's how do we take and enable these brilliant people to do a thing and get that to people faster? We can't do the Neuralink, let's spend 14 years before we have a clinical trial. It's amazing work that they've done. It's a long haul the way we're doing it now. And I think there's better ways to do that potentially.
Yeah. Yeah, great. Okay, so I've heard this same line. I've heard people talk about this a lot. Do you guys have results? Have you spun anything off? Do you have patents? What's it look like from your guys' end?
Yeah, so we're still in stealth, so I'm not going to go super deep. I'll happily come back when we're more public with what we're doing. But I think our approach has really been to rethink the space completely, whether that's from a software standpoint, whether it's from a device standpoint. How can we move quicker to build the technologies in partnership with different universities, individuals? This idea of building hardware and vertically integrating the entire thing is very complicated. It's very arduous. And we often do these in silos. And I think, again, the models that we put forward in other domains, I think we can do this more rapidly. So we have just a kind of high level. I think now we're at 56 patents that we've had for the work that we've done. Multiple are issued. We've aggregated a bunch of folks together to do this work, many of whom you will know the name when this surfaces, have come together to try and do a thing. And we think that's really unique. So we're trying to, what I say, build from within. It's to go to the experts and the people who've been working in these areas for sometimes decades and go, all right, if you could work together and build a thing, what would you do? And that's been from the onset, the premise of what we wanted to do is really rethink the field, how we think about signal processing, how we think about data, how we think about hardware, how we think about invasive versus non-invasive, how do we think about the nervous system as a whole. These are all very important concepts. And most companies have been very focused for decades about just really specifics around hardware design, better signal processing, things like that. I think there's an aggregate of technologies that can be brought together to maybe do this a little differently, and that's where we focused.
Yeah. On your page, it says 180 years of collective senior leadership, 110 plus products commercialized, 250 plus patents issued,
Yeah.
25 plus exits, 20 billion return on investment. So hopefully I'm not saying anything that's not public.
No, that's all accurate, and that's through the studio, right? So that's through NeuFluent, and the people that were brought there, again, like luminaries across like the med tech, med device space, came together to kind of do a thing. And across their careers, these folks have done immense amount of work. Like my partner Ryan, just as an example, he's had 30 devices that have been commercially successful in market. And he's just one example of the folks that have come to the middle to do this work. And this is always the hard part about a startup. You're always trying to pull people together, find those folks to work there. And we have all done that. And I think the idea here was to say, okay, like if you could get the best person who does this thing, can we bring them in and work together? And that's what we've been able to do.
So those numbers, those are the history or the biography of leadership, right?
Group that's come together
Got
for,
it. Okay.
yeah,
Okay.
100%.
Are you guys recruiting, or are you guys inviting people in, almost like venture capital, giving talks or something like that, or everybody wants to pitch you, or is this kind of a closed thing?
We're going to start doing some fundraising. We've been very fortunate to have some ultra high net worth people who are interested in the stuff that we're doing and have been bootstrapping for a couple of years with the work that's happened. But we're certainly going to go out and raise. And so if there's some great venture capitalists or family offices or interested individuals who listen to your podcast, I'd love to have them reach out.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, very cool. Another thing that you're involved in is digital neurosurgery. So, what does this mean? What does this involve? Does this like mean robots and you got the Da Vinci robot, or what's going on here?
Yeah, again, I've been very lucky to work on a couple different technologies over the last 15 to 20 years. And one of the projects that we worked on at the university here was to do a company called Propria doing surgical navigation. So that was using light field and computer vision to track the anatomy in real time. We developed a robot that had a large sensor array, and through that work, I got very interested in as the field of machine learning certainly started to develop. And now as we've moved into what everybody just colloquially calls like AI, one of the things that came up about 4 years ago, one of my colleagues, Dan Donahoe, who ironically is another pediatric neurosurgeon who's in Washington, D.C., he approached me as he was working separately in computer vision to talk about just the field of neurosurgery and the fact that kind of both felt like there wasn't enough attention being paid to where we thought the hockey puck is going to go. Like all the crazy stuff that we talk about every single day about AI and open AI and all these different things was maybe lesser of a conversation, certainly professionally in neurosurgery about 6 years ago. So Dan and I decided to put on the first neurosurgery meeting that was solely focused on artificial intelligence. We bootstrapped that meeting, put it on in Palo Alto a little over 4 years ago now. So we were able to bring together luminaries in the technologies space and showed the leadership in neurosurgery what was happening in other domains. So as an example, we brought in folks from autonomous driving, right? Like that's understanding the environment that you're in. We brought in folks who were working in sports related performance. So what are human performance factors that you can pick up either with AI or computer vision or whatever it might be? So after that meeting, the leadership in neurosurgery recognized that the way we do our meetings, whether that's the AANS or the CNS, well, there is content injected. There's not a focused effort that's happening to bring this to the field and really start to think about aggregating data. How do we teach residents to this emerging world? What does that mean for them? The ethics of what we do as neurosurgeons related to TI and this type of data we're recording. So we got charged by Organized Neurosurgery to come up with a new society. And so the Foundation for Digital Neurosurgery is the name. It's the first new society in neurosurgery that's been created in 80 years. We formed that up about 6 months ago. The AANS was an incredible starting partner and helped seed fund that. And so now we're out building a variety of different verticals nationally, ranging from neurotrauma and understanding that and the data and how we leverage different algorithms to assess and understand patients, outcome, treatment, through verticals such as ethics and neurosurgery and AI, right? So again, like that data that we're going to acquire as BCI becomes more ubiquitous, that's really important data. It's valuable. We got to treat it appropriately and start to put reasonable ethical principles around all of this. So we're quite interested in joining others who are doing that work around the country and have a variety of partnerships that are already emerging. One is which is around the brain health initiatives that have come out of Davos and the World Economic Forum. So we're working with those guys and I'll actually be presenting at the UN in September as part of a panel for some of these efforts that we're now joining. So I think the world's recognizing that what we do in neurosurgery and certainly in neuroscience, it's really going to be a defining thing for the next 30 years for humanity, what that means for us, both to treat disease and even these longer term thoughts of human augmentation or whatever that ultimately means. It's an interesting moment because these things are now becoming realistically possible when they were just science fiction a few years ago.
Yeah. Cool. Congrats. That sounds like a interesting thing. Talking at the UN, I think you're the first person that I've talked to that's mentioned that. So yeah, what digital data or what automated systems are not being used that should be used, especially in neurosurgery, and what kind of outcome do you think that might have?
I make the argument that we're still very analog in what we do. There's digital assets that are created and obtained through the process of the work that we do, whether that's historically putting in DBS for Parkinson's. And we used to make a joke as a resident that it was a 7 hour burr hole because you would stick a lead down and you'd hear the neurons crackling and somebody would geek out over that. And as a resident, you're standing there going, oh my God, is this case going to ever end? But that was incredible data, right? That was being collected about human function, brain function. And we're getting better at starting to really collect that data. There's a tremendous amount of work, obviously, in epilepsy around SEEG that goes on, surface EEG. The imaging that we get now is incredible, but it's largely siloed, largely left for clinical purposes. And one of the things I've been particularly interested in also is in the operating room, like when we're under the microscope, we're have the ability to capture tremendous amount of information, and most of that just doesn't either get captured or goes away, right? So we're sitting on the capability to do incredible computational work. The challenge has been that either the clinical systems don't recognize the utility of this or we're just not organized in a way to be able to capture, store, share that. And so that's been a big part of my mission is thinking through how do we take what we're doing and really create value out of that, right? And allow the moment that's probably sitting here and we're seeing in other industries to really come forward in the neurosciences. We're, I'd say, a fair ways behind which in other fields, but we have the ability to catch up. And I think it's really important because I care a lot about humanoid robotics, but I actually care a lot more about humans. And so I'd like to see us do a better job at these things.
Yeah, and clinical practice is notoriously slow to take on new standards, right? As they should be, right? They shouldn't be testing out every random thing. But yeah, a lot of times it might even be products. So maybe even this NeuFluent might plug into this and be able to utilize some kind of what do they call it? Digital exhaust of some things of, I don't know, radiology or whatever, some kind of like what you're talking about, the crackling of the DBS, maybe so electrophysiology and in a new and novel way and be able to combine those things in a cool way. I think, I don't know, in my mind, it really does feel like it almost needs to be a product or like a company that comes in with a new way of doing things. Or I don't know, maybe clinical practices do change and it's just, okay, this is a new standard of care or something like this. I don't know how easy that is to adopt, but yeah, how is that?
Yeah, again, it's been a big focus, right? Everybody's super busy. And so how you integrate technology into workflow becomes one of the critical factors, right? So if there's 3 or 4 extra steps that I have to do as a neurosurgeon, the adoption of that technology is going to be pretty low, right? And so the question becomes, how do you take existing workflow, existing data streams, and start to be able to organize, aggregate, and pull those together? And it's interesting because I think our colleagues are starting to really recognize that we have value outside of just operating the data that we're capturing, the way we capture it, the opportunities to work in this space. I think people are starting to pay a bit more attention to that. I had the great fortune of keynoting one of the talks at the AANS this year, and a large part of that talk was really this idea of what is the value that we as neurosurgeons provide. It's always been this very manual, I manipulate, I do a thing, I fix a thing, and that's like how I'm valued. But there's a much broader ecosystem of innovation, technology, data that we're instrumental in building, capturing, thinking about. And so I'm trying to get our field really to pay attention to what they do that's outside of kind of the narrow focus that we tend to have when we're operating. But yeah, there's immense opportunity to build new things and think about what is the evolution of neurosurgery look like. I am very squarely in the camp that many of the really complicated things are going to get solved over time, and that BCI and the implantation of different devices is going to totally transform neurosurgery, just like vascular neurosurgery was almost completely transformed from the ability to do endovascular. We rarely open people up to clip an aneurysm now. So that was a complete frame shift in technology that changed the way we manage that disease. I think BCI is going to come forward, and I think it's going to be a humongous component of neurosurgery in the future.
Yeah, cool. So yeah, what's your vision of the future 10 years from now, 15, 20 years from now? And then I guess now in 2026, we haven't said the word AI yet, so we might as well say that and how that plugs into everything too.
Yeah, I think we're going at 100 miles an hour toward this future, it feels like. I think there's some amazing companies that are coming out every single day. I think the last time I looked, there were probably 800 BCI, air quotes, companies around the world doing different things, from new leads to chips to all this stuff. As we're looking around, those technologies are going to be making their way to trials and hopefully to patients quickly. I think, again, when we talk about AI, what does that mean for signal processing? What does it mean for us as humans interacting with these technologies, especially if some of the code inside of us becomes more interpretable in different ways? That becomes a really interesting question. And I think more broadly, it starts to become a real question for the strategics that are in the space, like Medtronic and Stryker, the ones who typically create and give us the devices in neurosurgery. What are they going to do as this world is evolving? And I think the next 10 years is going to see a myriad of different new implantable devices that come forward. I think there's a common theme right now as to what they look like and largely what they do. This is where I'm interested in a frame shift and thinking maybe outside the box a little bit of what that might look like. I think AI is going to be fundamentally important to all of these things as we get better at really understanding ourselves. These devices are going to give a window into knowing the human brain and nervous system in ways that we couldn't even conceptualize even as early as just a few years back now.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I hope so. And I think it'll unlock the brain is incredibly complex. So someone said it's the most complex thing in the universe, and we might need a little bit of help trying to be able to understand that. With all this background, what do you think you are able to bring, or what are you able to, what's a different approach that you have, or you think you have compared to other people? And then maybe what are some things that you see being done incorrectly in the field? Or if you have a magic wand, what would you change?
Yeah, I think again, for me, a lot of this is the pace that we can bring innovations forward. The thing that's frustrating, people have different feelings about Elon, but I think what he's been able to do for the field of BCI to bring attention to it has been super valuable, right? But if you look back, it's a very arduous process from when they first got interested, and you look at BlackRock or you look at Synchron, the time to come up with a new idea and then bring that forward it's a long time, and that really isn't going to allow for a lot of the technologies that exist today to see their way to patients for a decade or more, right? And so part of this for me is, how do we rethink the process? How do we aggregate talent and knowledge? How do we bring institutions together to work collectively on these efforts? I think there's going to be ways to remunerate everybody who's brought something valuable to this, right? And we always probably over focus on that in some way, and then we silo down and just kind of work in a vertical to build a thing. So that's been a big part of this, is really rethinking. Here's a moment in humanity, right? Like with AI, how are we going to leverage that? And how do we keep pace with the evolution of the technology to get this stuff to humans? I'm very optimistic that we can do this differently. And that's, again, been the focus of the group that we put together, to maybe take a pause and relook at this and go, all right, maybe I'd do this a little bit different, especially having 2020 hindsight on what the field has done for the last 40 years.
I think that's absolutely correct. Is the things are very slow, and I think even Neuralink, they're basically be able to throw as unlimited money at the problem, and they're moving relatively slow on one hand, and then on the other hand, I'm also like, wow, they're moving really fast. But still, it's taken a decade essentially to get something to market and start implanting people. It can be an issue now with this era of deregulation we're getting in the U.S. and a lot of these agencies being shut down. I've heard talks maybe FDA might be gutted or shut down or whatever. So we might get our wish. We might enter the Wild West here pretty soon.
Yeah, we got to be a little careful. Obviously, we want to keep the boundaries appropriate as we build all these things. But yeah, it's an interesting moment for folks who are interested in BCI and sort of the brain and what we can do. And it's interesting looking at where everybody's been. And if you look at the market, like 80% of the BCI market's in mental health at the end of the day. And where the companies are focusing now, how they think about growing those businesses, like the number of patients that are in each of these different verticals. You look at stroke, that's a big market. You look at paralysis, smaller. It's an interesting thing thinking about the business of BCI and where does one put the energy around product development.
Okay. And if you were to tell a student who's interested in BCI or maybe pediatric neurosurgery or neurosurgery, what would you recommend? What would you sit them down and talk to them about? What would you say?
I would say they're so lucky if they're that much younger than me that they're hitting this at the sweet spot. There's just this moment in humanity that's happening with AI and the technology that's now accessible to everybody that they have a chance to really change humanity. I think this is one of the most important areas to make smart people focus if they want to really help humans and take amazing technologies to do that. There's a moment in time now that's really possible. And so I'm super excited. We get a lot of the residents now wanting to work in this space. They've recognized that it's really different than sitting in a lab and maybe pipetting and doing basic science. The ability to do computational work around neurosurgery and neuroscience and the pace that can move is really different, and the ability to think through making a device that's going to actually help somebody. So I would say to any of the students that listen to your podcast, you're really lucky. It's such a cool moment. Lean in as hard as you can. For those who are interested in neurosurgery, it's the greatest thing ever. It's literally the hardest thing ever. And so you got to really love it, or you really should do something else. But I've been so lucky to do what I do, and I wouldn't change anything. I've been very fortunate to help so many kids, and I love that part of my job. And seeing the gaps in the care that we can deliver has really spawned a lot of the thoughts around how do we innovate and change and push medicine forward, and just the frustration, not really frustration you hear today, but the push to go faster is really this desire to get these things out there quicker to help people. And I think we can do that. And yeah, the young people coming through now, I'm so excited for them. It's just a moment in history and they hit it at the sweet spot.
Yeah, really. Is there anything that you would recommend to stay away from and anything that's maybe overhyped, or what do you think?
No, I think what I'd say is you'll hear negativity around what's going on in different ways. And I look at it just the opposite. I think as we look at artificial intelligence and what that means for humanity, I am much more in the camp of positivity that this is going to be transformational and only help us and make us better. I'd say the hype for me is on the positive side. And so when they hear all these other things, I think they should really look at what the opportunity is to create and do something good for humanity and really focus on the good side of all of this, because I think that's important. And the ethics and some of the stuff we talked about earlier, if they're following an ethical and ideological approach to just helping people, everybody's going to do great.
Yeah. Hopefully, I'm of the same opinion. I think it's going to be much more positive than negative. It's a tool, right? And this tool is built with us. And so it's actually, I would say, hyper ethical usually. But yeah, is there anything that we didn't talk about that you wanted to mention?
No, I think we covered a lot today. I'm just super excited for folks like yourself getting the word out about what's happening, certainly in neurotechnology and neuroscience and BCI. And I think it's a place where we want people outside of sort of the medical and science profession to really be paying attention. You talked a bit about investors and things like that. We'd love to see as much funding from the government come toward this, make it a national strategic priority like China has around BCI. we think these things are going to be transformational for society. So appreciate you getting the word out. And it's just, I think, a core competency for many universities and researchers in this moment. And so the more attention it can get, the better, I think.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you so much.
It was a pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Hope you enjoyed the show and were able to learn something new, bringing together different fields in novel ways. Until next time on the Neural Implant Podcast.